Are we alone in the universe, or do aliens exist? The Catholic Church today and throughout history has something to say about this. And what famous and incredible saint stated, "The Lord certainly did not limit his glory to this small earth. On other planets, other beings exist who did not sin and fall as we did." But what does this mean for us as men being created in the Imago Dei, or the image of God? We go into this and a lot more on today's show. Stay with us.
Welcome back to another episode of the Catholic Gentleman Podcast. I am joined by my co-host John Heinen, and my name is Sam Guzman. And today we have an awesome topic. Actually, I don't know if it's awesome, but it's definitely unique, definitely different. We're going to be talking about extraterrestrial intelligence, something that's kind of been in the news a lot lately. And we have with us someone who just wrote a book about this topic and what the Catholic Church has to say about extraterrestrial intelligence, and that's Dr. Paul Thigpen. And he is well known to many of you due to his many books, but I'll briefly introduce him. He has a BA in Religious Studies from Yale University and a master's degree and a PhD in Historical Theology from Emory University. And he served on the faculty of multiple universities, and he is a best-selling author and award-winning journalist, and he frequently gives talks at parishes and conferences. He's pretty much everywhere, so you've probably heard of him. Dr. Paul Thigpen, thank you for being with us.
Great to be here, Sam and John. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, so we're really excited about talking about this. It's so timely and relevant. You know, there's been this UFO stuff going on for decades now, and it just seems to be heating up. You know, with congressional hearings happening about it, and all these documents being released, and pretty much everybody's at least aware of the fact that there's these unconfirmed, UFOs, and there's different names for them now. But we really wanted a Catholic perspective on this topic because the Church does have something to say about it, and the saints do have something to say about it. So before we get there, though, what got you interested in this, and what really inspired you to write a book about this topic?
Well, Sam, it's something I've been interested in since childhood. And when I became a Christian at the age of 18, I've been an atheist before that for 6 years. Thought, how would my faith accommodate this if these things are real? And so, given thought for many years, and when I became Catholic, I said, okay, now how would my Catholic faith accommodate this? And it's probably by now 8 or 9 years ago that the publisher of Tam Books, who's the publisher of this book, Connor Gallagher, a dear friend, and I were walking along the beach at an editorial retreat at Myrtle Beach, and I don't know, I saw a light in the sky or something, and said, Connor, you may think I need a tinfoil hat, but I've been wanting to write a book about extraterrestrial intelligence and the Catholic faith. He said, write it, I'll publish it. Well, it was all those years ago. I didn't have much time. I was in the middle of other things, but he gave me the confidence that somebody would publish it. And so then, a couple of years ago now, 2019, I get word from a friend of mine who's a Catholic journalist with an interest in the subject, that she's in touch with a reporter at the New York Times who's told her that he's going to be publishing an article they are going to at some point soon, and they did, talking about the secret agency that the government has had and denied for years to study UFOs. They call them now UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena.
Okay.
And it includes folks talking about retrieve material from crashed UFOs. I thought, oh my goodness, this is really wild. So it did come out that summer, 2019, but it hardly made a ripple because it was right at the height of the rioting that was going on in cities and the COVID stuff. And so everybody was so preoccupied with certain terrestrial issues that most people missed it. But only, since then, as Sam was alluding to, lots of things have continued to kind of come out from respectable news media, and the government itself making some admissions, some fine journalists working on it, both here in this country and one in Australia that I particularly like. And so it seemed like in 2019, when I found about that, I said, okay, Connor, the publisher, I need to start working on this. I was still working on other things. So it took me a couple of years because it's probably the most substantial work I've done since my doctoral dissertation.
Wow.
But, so anyway, and then the timing kind of worked out. I thought that all the stuff was going to come out with Congress before the book came out, and the book was taking a long time. But, as the Lord would have it, about the time the book came out, June, we had just had hearings in Congress in May, and there will be more soon. So I think the timing's right. The book's not about UFOs, but UFOs are closely related. I ended up doing an appendix at the end about that. But it's more about if we should, encounter or discover or have a disclosure of the existence of extraterrestrial intelligence, would that disprove the Christian faith? Because there are many, many adversaries of ours who for centuries have actually said that. And my answer is no, not at all. And so it's a look at that question. It's in some ways an apologetics book.
Yeah, I think that's excellent. And I appreciate you kind of sharing my first question as well, which was, why enter into this other than, sort of a childish fascination and curiosity. So I appreciate you sharing that. I do want to ask you, just kind of leading on that, is what do we as men have to have as foundational conditions for entering into this, conversation? As much as it is an apologetic book, as you just stated, it's incredibly informative. I don't know how many hundreds of citations you have in the book, but you lay some groundwork as I think is really important for men to be aware of and informed when approaching this topic. Because as I started dropping the hints to people around me that I was going to have this interview today, I got people who immediately said, not interested, don't believe in them. I had people who, do strongly believe in them, kind of like all over the place, but everybody is already sided with their opinion. So I'd love to hear you kind of lay that foundation for us.
Oh, that's a great question. One of the themes of the book is humility. Mm-hmm. And I think that's just something we have to keep in mind. Rather than coming to it and saying we already have it figured out. I certainly didn't come to it saying we already have figured out. I had the interest. And I learned, so many things. My field is historical theology. So how Christian doctrine and teaching has developed, Christian thought over the centuries. And so that's how I approached the first part of it, because I realized that, I came to realize what I didn't realize, that this is a conversation that's been going on in the Christian community, in the Catholic Church, all the way back to the beginning. Mm-hmm. And before that in pagan, Roman, and Greek circles. And to try to talk about the subject, the possibility of it, how it fits in our theology, without looking at the history of the historical conversation is a problem. Because I don't know, think about, you go to a party and it's been in progress for an hour, you come late, and you walk up to a group that's having a lively conversation, and you go up and you want to start talking about the conversation, and you make a point, and they say, oh, well, he just said that 10 minutes ago. And he said, well, how about this? And they said, well, no, we already figured out that's not true 10 minutes ago. And you realize I better not say anything unless I know the conversation. So that's what I've done. The first part of the book kind of takes us back all the way to pre-Christian times, but then to the Church Fathers, to the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, the centuries since then, and looks at how Christian thinkers, and particularly Catholic thinkers, have dealt with this issue. And one of the things it does right away is to help us see that our current sense, a lot of people, including the media, that this is a silly topic or not a serious topic that we need tinfoil hats if we're interested in, that's an historical anomaly itself. It's an exception that except for now, all the centuries, going back 25, almost 26 centuries, the best minds of Western thought, including Catholic minds, have taken this issue very seriously, even if they came to different conclusions about it. Taking it very seriously. St. Albert the Great, I have a wonderful quote in there where he just says, it's a marvelous thing to think about other worlds and that kind of thing. So of course we should be interested in it. But there are historical reasons. We could go into that, maybe in a minute. But why our generation has come to think of it as something silly and to be dismissed. It actually involves the U.S. government's work to make that happen. But it's anyway. So part of what that does is it kind of freezes up to say, no, if someone like Padre Pio or someone like Saint Albert the Great or some other folks, Saint John Chrysostom, can talk about the possibility of other worlds and other races that are intelligent, so can we. And there's nothing silly about it. And in fact, what I found is the more I delved into it, the deeper I began to understand my faith. It made me revisit topics I hadn't looked at deeply since my graduate program many years ago, about the nature of Christ, the nature of salvation, and what the image of God, as you mentioned. So it's a very powerful conversation that's gone on, and one that I think is relevant in many ways.
Yeah, thank you.
So yeah, that leads to a great follow-up question: is what did they say? I mean, what were the conclusions of some of these great minds? I mean, I know it's probably a lot to cover simply because there's a lot cited in the book, but just some highlights of what were some of the opinions of these great thinkers.
Yeah, so if you start, just to give a big overview, you start with the ancient Greek philosophers. You have folks like Democritus, who is the one who actually gave us first the notion of atoms, and he was looking at cosmology and how things come about, how things are made, who believed that, sure, there are multiple universes. And this is something we have to consider, that in that conversation, early on in the conversation, the Greek word cosmos, that we have as cosmos, could mean just world, like our planet Earth, or it could mean everything that is kind of materially the universe. And so the early question was, could there be more than one cosmos? And they tended to think of it as universes. And so Democritus said, well, yeah, I think there's an infinite number, and there are probably inhabitants in all of them. You had folks like Plato and Aristotle, that your viewers will probably recognize, who did not think that, but it was kind of for philosophical reasons. They had the sense that because of their notion that there are four elements and Earth is the heaviest, and that all the elements kind of go to their proper places and all the Earth comes to one place. So, and that's the center of the universe, kind of gravity brings it all in. And so the Earth is the center of the universe. There can't even be any other kind of planet anywhere. I mean, that's how limited their science was. And we're the center of the universe. And if there was one maker, as Plato thought, and also as Aristotle thought, then it would be less than perfect for him to make more than one world. To us, that kind of sounds, I don't know how that follows, but and then their thought did have lots of influence eventually, especially through St. Thomas Aquinas in the Middle Ages. But the early church fathers, they knew these debates. They talked about some of the stuff. You have some early writers saying, yeah, he can make all kinds of worlds and inhabited species. Others who said, well, he could, but he's only made this one. And that was usually under the influence of Plato and Aristotle. And but by the time, finally, late Middle Ages, people began to break out of the limits of Aristotelian science, of the science that Aristotle had taught, that the Earth is the center of one single universe, and that's all it can be. They began to say, no, there could be other possibilities and especially, I mean, even Aristotle himself had this, that the moon could be inhabited, even though it kind of was contrary to some other thoughts he had. Plato believed that the stars were actually animated, that they were alive, that they had souls, that the demiurge, as he called it, the creator, had given a soul to each one of the stars out there. And so in that sense, he believed in extraterrestrial life. But by the time you finally begin to get to people breaking free of Aristotle's science, as it had been brought in by Thomas Aquinas and others, and I love St. Thomas, it's not anything against him, they began to say, yeah, there really are other possibilities. And even during the time of Thomas and others, you had church voices coming back and saying, now, you may think there's only one, but don't you dare say that God could not make more than one. He's all powerful. And that's always been one of the things pushing against folks who would say, oh, no, only one. They say, well, you may think there's only one, but don't say that God couldn't make other worlds, because he's all powerful. And so that's that and the notion that there's a plenitude, a fullness of what God has done, and the way he fills life here, why wouldn't he fill the universe with other worlds and lives? So by the time of Galileo, of course, and all that went on there, we could go into that, but that's another story. And people began to realize, including Jesuit astronomers and others, that there's a whole lot of space out there, and there are actually planets out there, stars that probably have their own planets. Then the possibilities began to open up, and people said, well, why couldn't we? Why couldn't there be more? Couldn't God, so creative, so powerful, why couldn't he have done that? And then you get into other questions once you do that about, okay, what's the relationship of Christ's incarnation on earth to that? Or could it be? And are they fallen or unfallen? As we said, Padre Pio, St. Pio believed that there was some that were unfallen. And if so, are they redeemed? You get into all kinds of questions. But the main point is that there sure seems to be room within Catholic thought for all that. And the church, though Catholic leaders have had things to say, including some of the saints, the church has never defined that. It's like they've always left it to science. Well, let's see what we learn. It's interesting to me that before Vatican II, there was a survey sent out to the bishops of the world to ask what kinds of questions bishops might want the council to address. And apparently, the Cardinal Bishop of Washington, D.C. said, I think we need to address, because at the beginning of the space age, I think we need to address whether there's intelligent life on other planets. Obviously, the church fathers didn't. So my guess is that they were doing what earlier generations have done and said, God hasn't shown anything to us about it, so there's not much we can say. Let's see what science says. But they certainly didn't come out and make a statement that, oh no, there's no such thing.
Yeah, and so we have this and you do such an incredible job in your book, and you bring it out, and we're going to put this book in the show notes and everything so you can grab it. But you do such a great job of expanding the church history and all of these conversations from philosophers. Even you go into Protestants and what they've stated and things of that nature. So how did we get to where we are today, where I'm going to be honest, myself included, going through your book, there are a lot of greatness. And I would say that one of the big things is deepening my understanding of the Catholic faith, right? Because the more we reflect on these possibilities, the more we start to appreciate things like the Imago Dei or our own redemption as man or Our Lady's relationship to Christ. But how did we get, before we talk about all those things, how did we get to where we are today, where basically the average common individual isn't aware that the church has spoken of these things, and their knowledge of aliens is limited to, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Men in Black, Independence Day, and, these different alien movies. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that from you.
Sure. Yeah, it's interesting. So St. John Newman, who's just recently fully canonized, British convert and brilliant man, of course, had a lot to do with my own conversion. Becoming Catholic, but he made the statement at one point that's, I think, very telling, that in the time he was writing, so the end of the 1800s, the end of the 19th century, he said basically it is such it seems to be almost absolute universal that everybody believes in intelligent races on other planets, and in most elite circles, for you to question that is blasphemy, is treated like blasphemy. Now, he wasn't saying the church was doing that, but that's what was the common idea by that time, was that everybody. And you look at all the writers, they're all saying, of course there are. Let's talk about the possibilities. One thing that began to push back on it some was with the coming of Darwin and his teaching about evolution. And as people began to understand and think about that, you had a stream kind of within science saying all the conditions on Earth that came about to make it possible for life and then life to evolve into intelligence. We're not so sure you can find that anywhere else. It may very well be we're the only ones that are alone. And so what you begin to have is within the field of science itself, the guys who were the biologists started pushing for no, rare, or maybe we're the only ones. But at the same time, you had the guys who were the astronomers, the cosmologists, looking at the big picture saying, no, look at all the possibilities. There are billions, there are trillions of stars out there. Of course it's possible. But really, so that by the time of the 60s. I have some of the folks I quote saying that in the academy, you just wouldn't even dare mention that you want to talk about this, and it was poo-pooed, and only later did people begin to say, like one did, oh no, life is a cosmic imperative, it'll be everywhere. So what helped to push things that way? And we have to look at some political history there, and this is where it does touch on the subject of UFOs. That starting in World War II, there began to be a number of sightings of things that could not be explained in the skies. In the Second World War, both Allied pilots, military pilots, and the Axis pilots were beginning to see these bright things that would come all around them and fly next to them that they couldn't explain. They thought it was, each side thought it was some high technology of the other side. So the Allies thought the Nazis had developed it. The Nazis thought we had developed it. After the war, everybody finds out, no, none of us made it. Where did they come from? They even nicknamed them Foo Fighters. And so they had a name for it. And then immediately after the war was over, starting in 1947, all kinds of things. Your viewers have probably heard of Roswell, but there were others that came about. All kinds of stories and things coming up. And keep in mind, this is the Cold War. It's right after World War II, and we now have documents uncovered by the Freedom of Information Act recovered that show very clearly that both the Pentagon and the CIA made conscious decisions that, in the interest of national security, we don't want it to look like we don't have control of the skies, number one. And number two, the Soviets could take advantage of this because every time there was a flap, and there was a big one over Washington, D.C., there was a big one over Los Angeles, where they were sending out jet fighters and people seeing all these things flying over. When that would happen, then all of a sudden, all the phone, the call-in, the people handling phone calls would be swamped because everybody's seeing it. And they said this would be a great time for them, the Soviets, to send something actually over a bomb or something, and we'd be caught off guard. So whatever the reasoning was, they made an intentional decision. We are going to deny this. We're going to try to cover it up. I know it sounds like conspiracy theory, but we've got the documentation now for it. And not only that they were going to do their best to make sure that the media, entertainment and news media, went along with it, to hold up to mockery and ridicule anyone who even wanted to talk about this. They were successful, but that's coming to an end. The government has admitted that, there are things out there that we can't explain, and they don't seem to be Russian or Chinese, and they're definitely not ours. There's certain, they call them the 5 observables, things that make it look like they're not following the laws of physics as we know them. There's a lot more that the Pentagon knows that they're not telling, but Congress is about to have some more hearings, and there are probably some whistleblowers going to come forward. That's the information that I have. So if that happens, and if if the government actually finally say, yep, they're out there, they're intelligent, and they're not us, I don't want Catholics or the Christians to think, oh my gosh, what does that do to my faith? It's not in the Bible. How do I handle that? And there will be people, there are people out there, as there have been for a couple hundred years, saying, see, this disproves your faith. It's not in your Bible. And your salvation, you think that you have a special relationship with God. Well, look, he might have all these other millions of races, so that makes you not so special. But that's not at all the case. It's not at all the case.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's interesting because a lot of the interest in extraterrestrials came about right around the time as like this atom bomb was dropped, and we were like in this new scientific age, and it's almost like a new mythology almost emerging around this. But I hear a lot of Christians say, like, just being so dismissive, like this is just demonic activity. If it is real, and if it isn't real, it's just complete fake hoaxes and so many things. And so what would you say to somebody who says, that this is demonic activity, or maybe not even evil spirits, but maybe it's just spiritual, it's just like angels or something. but it's certainly not creatures from this world or this universe as we know it. It's from other dimensions or something. But what would you say to someone who either wants to dismiss it or just explain it as kind of spiritual entities?
Yeah, I'd say that, first of all, that I agree with them to the extent that there are certain cases, especially of the so-called alien abductions, that sure have a lot of parallels to the church's classic accounts of demonic encounters. Even secular observers have noticed that, say, hey, this sounds like some of the stuff I read in medieval literature about people encountering demons. And so you have cases where someone is abducted against their will, or this is the claim, they're abducted against their will, they're sexually assaulted, or even they have some revelation from the creatures that are talking to them that all the religions are wrong and this is a new religion that is true. And boy, we have plenty of parallels with that, in church history. And I think, and then especially because there's some Christians who have claimed that they were having this experience, and when they said something like, in the name of Jesus Christ, stop, that it stopped. In cases like that, I think, yeah, it's probably demonic. But that's a small group of the cases. And there's a whole lot more with this that doesn't fit that profile at all. And especially if, as wow, it was in the New York Times article, and we've got people openly saying, yeah, we've got retrieved crash material. It's kind of nuts and bolts stuff. It's made of material that we can't, and I think that's going to eventually come out. It's probably been turned over to the private aerospace industry for study and to try to reverse engineer. And that's, I think the evidence is piling up for that. But if that's the case, how are you going to say that was demonic? Something that's been around for years, that's hard physical, that people have touched and examined the chemical stuff of. It's one thing to say, all right, you see a light in the sky, maybe that's an angel or a demon. Okay, yeah, could be. But if you're going to have that kind of stuff, why would demons be flying around in a ship? They don't even have bodies. So I would just say, don't paint with a broad brush the whole thing with hundreds of thousands of testimonies of things that have to do with stuff we can't explain. Don't paint that all as demonic, especially when it doesn't fit the profile at all, where it doesn't seem to be malicious. It's not trying to convince us of another religion. It's not hurting us in any way. I think probably there's a lot of stuff going on that ETI, extraterrestrial intelligences, may account for some of it, but not for all of it. So some of it may be demonic. Some of it may be people may be seeing angels flying. Some of it, this is, probably kind of controversial part. It's the last part of the book on where I do just briefly address UFOs, is the notion that it could be ultra-terrestrials. And what do you mean by that?
Yeah.
That it could actually be non-intelligent, non-human intelligences that share our Earth with us and that have been here for a long time. And there's plenty of evidence that maybe suggests that's the case. Now, what do I mean by that? The kinds of things that the ancients would have called centaurs, satyrs, the Greeks would have called them. Other folks would have called leprechauns or fairy people, or that kind of thing. Even maybe the phenomenon of poltergeist, and all those people hear that and they just freeze up and say, no, we can't.
Yeah.
But the truth is, Christians, St. Augustine and St. Jerome both believed in centaurs and satyrs. They talked about it. They thought that they were real non-human intelligence. They believed in a form of ultra-terrestrials. We've had others. There's an exorcist, St. Estrade, who wrote about the year 1700 and how there are a lot of things that demonic powers they would encounter and overcome in exorcisms, but there were these other things out there that weren't demonic at all. You have Father Herbert Thurston, early 1900s, looking through all these cases from Europe of poltergeist activity. And a lot of it, turned out to be demonic. They bring in the exorcist and the sacraments and the sacramentals and the prayers and stuff conquers the thing. But others, it doesn't touch them. It doesn't do anything. And but they're demons. They've got to submit, sooner or later. And instead, there's something that's intelligent that's acting kind of like naughty little children doing prankster stuff. So I know that sounds wild, and I only bring it up at the end. It's not the main part of the book. The main part of the book, if every UFO or no UFO was proven to be extraterrestrial, the book would still stand. The point of it would be that we can accommodate that if it should be the truth. And that the church has for a long time accommodated, or at least Catholic thinkers have for a long time accommodated it and talked about ways in which it would just be the creativity of God and showing his diversity.
Yeah. Well, you piqued my curiosity, and that part of me wants to continue down on this path, but I'm going to shift us towards the more core of the book in that Christian Catholic apologetics. And I just want to start by, again, reaffirming, as I did earlier, that this book is excellent for helping us to truly dive into some of the depths of, in a very practical way, of church teachings, Catholic theology and our understanding of creation and everything like that. So I kind of want to start there, and I want to start with you and say, how do you respond to, if aliens or extraterrestrial intelligence existed, what would that mean for us being created in the Imago Dei? What would that mean for us being created in the image of God? And I know we'll have to define what we mean by that, but I'd really like to hear it from you because you go into this in such a great way in your book.
Thank you. It's, first we have to define image of God. And for a lot of folks, I even know for myself, I tended to just say, okay, it's a rational intellect and a free will.
Yeah.
And the more I realized, thought about that, the more I realized we really do need to add another aspect to that. And that is that our soul is immortal, that our spirit is immortal. In part because you start looking at, what they're finding out about Neanderthals on this planet, for instance, is that they really did seem to have some evidence of rational intellect and free will.
Yeah.
But we know that the humans are the only ones on this planet made in the image of God, and that they were more like the animals with if they had a soul like that, it wasn't destined for eternity. They weren't made for the beatific vision as we are. So immortality is an important part. I think it's in the book of Sirach that where it talks about how he's made us immortal. It's part of his image. Don't have the numbers in front of me, but so that's an important thing to realize then, that if that's the image of God, rational intellect, free will, and the soul that it possesses, that the race possesses, is immortal and intended, to live forever and with him in joy, then the question becomes, okay, could another race some characteristic that may be very different from us? Because image of God doesn't really mean, that you have hair and beard and stuff like that.
Unfortunately, but
yeah. Although St. Thomas would talk about how, the fact that we have a hand actually is in his image, in the sense that God has active power and you act with your hand. And so it's like that. But you can say that, about other forms, physical forms as well. So the question is, would he do that, or could he do that in other places? And of course, again, the answer has to be, well, of course he could, but has he? And then what you get into is people, a concern, and some have raised this for centuries, that, well, wait a minute, our faith teaches that we have a special relationship with God, and that would take away from our specialness, wouldn't it? What if there were thousands, millions of other intelligent species out there somehow made in the image of God as well? So the first question it kind of raises is, doesn't that affect our specialness? Our response to that is, to think about what St. Augustine once said, that he said God loves each one of us as if there were only one of us, and he loves all of us as he loves each one of us. And any parent of more than one child understands exactly what he means. Your first child's born, you think, oh, I'm in love. How can I love this child any more than I do? And then the second child comes along, and it doesn't divide your love. It doesn't diminish your love. You love the second one the same way, and you love each of them as if there were only one of them. Your love is multiplied. God, who is love himself, infinite love, his love for us isn't diminished if he has other children out there. So that's one way to kind of respond to that. Others who say, well, it's not in the Bible, so it can't be. But well, dinosaurs and duck-billed platypuses and molecules and microbes are not in the Bible either. It's not intended to be, and we know they exist, not intended to be a complete textbook in science that way. So it did. Yeah, I think, yes, it certainly is possible for him to have other intelligent species and to love them dearly. And if that's possible, then a good part of what the second part of the book is about is saying, okay, what are the possibilities? And is there anything in scripture or catechism that would rule them out? I should say too that there's some passages in Scripture and Catechism that will talk about man, you put all things under his feet and given him dominion, and so some folks will say that means so we're the only ones in the universe. But then you look at in context the rest of what it says, and it says all animals, and he talks about all the lower animals and inanimate things, and so still just talking about the earth. You have some passages that talk about that for instance the cosmos is longing for the sons of God, and talking about the ones on earth that come into their own, and that could still be possible even with others, because each one of those races would have to play their own part in the great cosmic drama of salvation. So anyway, every passage that I think has been raised either in Scripture or Catechism, I've dealt with in the book. I think here's another way to explain it. And sometimes the word "all" will be used, and it sounds like it's an absolute all. And I even had one Thomas, who's a friend of mine, say, and in this context, seems to me to say you're only talking about all on earth would be kind of special pleading or something. But actually, I go back and see that that's how St. Thomas Aquinas, understood the passage, as did some of the church fathers too. You always have to be careful with all. When you say all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, well, does that include Jesus? Does that include Mary? Right. So questions like that. But I think it's possible to deal with it in a reasonable way. And I never say in the book it is this way. We definitely have all those others. But to say it certainly could be, and if it is, it doesn't undermine our faith. It will enrich it. We'll have plenty of questions to ask if we actually encounter species out there to find out what is their understanding of God. Are they fallen or not fallen? If they have fallen, has God acted on their behalf to redeem them with a plan? St. Thomas Aquinas, when he dealt with the question of, did God have to redeem us the way he did? His answer was no. He could have done it. He's God. He could do it another way. But this is what was fitting, for us. And so you take that on a bigger scale and say, okay, he wouldn't have to redeem them the way he redeems us. St. Thomas even said in the issue of multiple incarnations, what if the Son of God were to choose to be incarnate on another planet? And Thomas wasn't talking about another planet, but he set up the principle. He said, again, God is God. The Son of God could have taken on more than one human nature, and it would not contradict anything in him. And I think the principle's the same for other species. He could take on another nature. It would not be then two lords, two saviors, two sons of God. It would only be one Son of God who has taken on two natures. And to understand that, you have to look some at the early Christological controversies to realize that the kind of false notion which still pops up today that what God did is take a man, Jesus, and join himself to it, so that there were two persons there. That's not true. It's one person, the eternal Son of God, who took on everything that was human. Thomas says he could do that again. Not that he would on earth, but it's possible for him to do that again without any inherent contradiction.
This rich tradition of our church, has really thought through almost every question.
Haven't they?
And there is this. I'd like you to say something too, about this kind of this curiosity that these great thinkers had, but also their openness to engage with these questions without fear. And I just noticed, you've been saying, and I think we've all encountered this to some extent, but people who are afraid to engage with these questions, they think somehow it's undermining the faith or threatening the faith or not pertinent to salvation, therefore it doesn't matter. What would you say to someone who says well, this is either dangerous or irrelevant, and therefore you shouldn't even be wasting your time with this? And how would you respond to someone who's kind of taking that approach?
Well, I would start with that quote I mentioned from St. Albert the Great, and he was the mentor of St. Thomas Aquinas, of course. Get my glasses here. So he's writing, since one of the most wondrous and noble questions about nature is whether there is one world or many, a question that the human mind desires to understand per se, just in itself, it seems desirable for us to inquire about it. And I think that's a beautiful attitude, and has been the attitude of so many, because he was a scientist. I've dedicated the book to him. He's a scientist as well as a theologian. That the attitude is, okay, this is let's think about this. There's something rich and wonderful about this. And I found that as I was looking at it, that I began to understand my own faith deeper, notions like the image of God and the incarnation, and going back to the foundations of faith. And so, first of all, it really is a beautiful, powerful thing that can stretch our minds. It also begins to, it increases your sense of wonder at God and his creation, to realize these things could be possible. It gives a whole new sense to the word omnipotent and the creativity of God. You begin to see God much more broadly. Like, oh my goodness, he could do that. Something I hadn't even thought of before. For folks who would say it's not relevant, I'd say, okay, for your life right now, it may not seem relevant, but if in the next few years, because not just the government, but it's also scientists are finally waking up to this and saying, all right, we're going to do our own studies. Galileo project with Avi Loeb at Harvard. We're going to start looking for the evidence ourselves without depending on the government. If it happens, it's going to be really relevant. It's going to be really relevant because it'll be in the news, it'll be in the media, but it'll be people saying your faith is ridiculous. It can't accommodate this, and it's going to be very relevant to be able to say, no, that's not true, and here's why. So I hope I'm getting to the whole of your question there, Sam, but those would be the reasons why it's, and definitely not dangerous if we're grounded in the faith. And I will admit, and I think everyone always should, that there are lots of folks who are addressing this who are kind of more in the new age, way of thinking, other kinds of stuff. And you have people like Emanuel Swedenborg, who centuries ago, and he started the whole movement, claimed that he was having these encounters with beings out there on other planets. And although Anne-Catherine Emmerich, blessed Anne-Catherine Emmerich, saw life out there as well, which is interesting in her visions. But so yes, you have to make sure you're not being drawn into the other stuff. But if you're well grounded in your faith, and I hope this book could help you be better grounded in your faith in this regard, you'll be able to take your stand and say, no, you can't say the Catholic churches can't accommodate this. You can't say that our faith can't accommodate it. Let's talk about it. It's not at all dangerous, unless, as long as you're grounded and as long as you recognize that the other stuff out there is coming from another direction. The interesting thing is that I think there are evangelistic possibilities here as well. I've been sending the book to some folks that I hope might be able to, who, as far as I know, are either not Catholic, not practicing Catholic, but are very interested in these things and believe that they sure seem to be evidence for them, as a way of being able to say, I think you're right, these things could be real. And here's how the Catholic Church, the Catholic teaching could help explain and put it in a framework. And so I think it's great. What you're finding is lots of folks who have been trained in the materialist worldview that there's only matter and energy, a kind of false science, a scientism, no God, no spirit, no nothing, which I actually held to that for 6 years as a teenager. And then what's happening is, as it happened to me, in this, when they start to study this, they start bumping up against things that they can't explain, that science can't explain. Our laws of physics can't explain some of the things going on in the skies that happen pretty often. According to one Navy pilot, has been happening every day for years, that they've observed these things, doing things that we can't understand. Now, it doesn't mean that those things are spiritual, but what's happening is it's getting people to think more about maybe science doesn't have all the answers. And it's getting to think about the nature of consciousness. You read that a lot. And again, you have to be careful you don't go in a kind of new agey kind of direction. But people come to the conclusion that, those scientists that say that consciousness is an epiphenomenon of the brain, that somehow the physical brain is able to give rise to consciousness. No, that doesn't seem to be the case at all. It's almost as if there's a consciousness that underlies the material world that gives rise to it. And I'm saying, you're getting very close to the idea of God. Or they'll say, look at quantum mechanics and look, there could be a particle that could be in two places at once. Isn't that amazing? And it's beyond everything. I say, yeah, well, talk to Catholics about bilocation of the saints. They're talking about entire human beings who are in two places at once. And, I'm not trying to put it down or anything, but I'm just saying to help them understand that the Catholic Church has always had this much broader view of things than a limited scientism that says if science can't explain it, understand it, it's not true, it doesn't exist. And to help begin to open up their minds to, there's a lot of stuff that is never dreamt of. And I want to say that sometimes to some scientists who are now beginning to say, there does seem to be things out there we don't understand. Yeah. And humility comes with that. If they'll let it, humility can come with that.
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, and I think some of the topics that you brought up, I mean, I guess you mentioned Blessed Anne Catherine Emmerich, and we've mentioned Padre Pio, both of them mystics in their own right, and Padre Pio, who had this ability, right, to read hearts and to see demons and see even saints or souls in purgatory and things like that. It does bring a very compelling thought process. For me, it did. When I came across that quote that I read early on in the teaser, that not only, are there other planets where beings exist, but there are those that did not sin and fall as we did. Mm-hmm. And that whole thought process didn't even occur to me. But then I did start thinking, well, what if human beings came into contact with individuals that had never fallen? Like, how would that be? What sort of new Lord of the Rings, could we really come out with? And so I'm curious to your thoughts on some of those things. I find them very compelling and again, fascinating to think about.
And those things have been talked about for centuries, as you saw in the book. The person who's probably done the most writing about that is C.S. Lewis, of course, who is not Catholic, but very close. And for so many of us, he helped me to come to, basic Christian faith out of atheism. But he writes a lot about it. And he just says, God save them from us if we should encounter an unfallen race, and that we would take might tend to take their simplicity that would come from holiness as some kind of stupidity that we could take advantage of, and maybe could. And even in his science fiction trilogy, where he tries to work out some of the things he's written about in his nonfiction, he has a race. He has several races that are unfallen, and what happens when an earthling gets there who is fallen and quite demonic, and what he tries to do. But it does give rise to an interesting thought that goes back several centuries, where people wondered, okay, why would God have put so much distance between the earth and other places that might have it? And their response is, it may very well be a quarantine.
Yeah, practical.
It could very well be, that maybe we're the only ones that fell. And God is saying, okay, we're keeping them in quarantine. They're staying in the dungeon here. You had, one German philosopher who was always saying, he was a Christian, not Catholic, but he thought God had made the best of all possible universes, because that's what God would do, because he does the best. And he would have all these people like Voltaire and others come back and say, oh, how ridiculous, look at all the evil in the world. This is terrible. It's not the best. How could it be the best possible universe? And then when he wrote about Life Without Place, he said, yeah, look at the distance. What I really think is probably the case that we're the only ones that have fallen. And so God has kept them from us. And actually, so it's no points against the Christian faith to say how much evil there is in this world, and that it could be the best possible universe. And maybe we're the worst possible planet in the best possible universe. And the image was like, what if what goes on here? What if this is the only place where all this misery goes on in the universe? And in that case, he said, our evil is no more telling argument against the goodness of God than what goes on in the dungeon, underneath the jail somewhere in some little corner of a wonderful kingdom. That doesn't undo all the goodness that's so much greater. So that's one of the reasons I loved going back through the historical conversation. These folks had such fascinating ideas that they would throw out. Some were kind of crazy, but I put those in there too, just to see the kind of intellectual ferment that's gone on for more than 2 millennia.
Oh, thank you.
I think the most important thing that I'm hearing you talk about is just this idea of humility. You talk about G.K. Chesterton and how he'd always encourage us to see the world, even our world that we're so familiar with, as almost like an alien world, where if we could just really see that, how much wonder, how much humility, how much praise and glory we would give to God. And I think in our modern scientific mindset, I think even a lot of Catholics have fallen into kind of a secular view where the only things like miracles are contained in your, maybe in your church, like on Sunday morning when during the mass, like, there a miracle happens. But as soon as you walk out the door, we're in like a secular world where we understand everything scientifically and everything is explainable, and and this is what the facts are, and we kind of close our minds to these possibilities. But actually, I worry that it kills our wonder, or kills our humility, kind of in the face of this mysterious universe that we do live in. And mysteries aren't a threat to the faith; they are. They can bring more glory to God if we approach them with a humble heart. So I guess for me, like, one of my last questions would be, this idea of extraterrestrials. Like, have you ever? This is a really personal question, but have you ever had an experience? Because I've been hearing more and more of the people like opening up as the conversation heats up, like they're kind of talking about their own experiences. And have you ever had any experience like that?
Well, I don't usually like to talk too much about it because that's, that, not that it's too personal, but I don't want to, take the attention away from the main point of the book. But there was a time when I was in high school, walking on the beach with some friends, and we looked up in the sky, and there were two large circular things glowing red and green that scared us pretty badly. We jumped in the car and drove back to my house, which is 8 miles away on the neighboring island. We were on the islands of the Georgia coast where I grew up, and they kind of followed us and then disappeared. Nothing beyond that. I did have a recurring dream when I was a kid that I didn't know at the time, but is similar to the first part of the common description of an abduction experience, but never went any further than I'm dreaming that I'm lying in bed, and all of a sudden this kind of bluish green light comes down the sky. It's cold. It paralyzes me. My brother lying next to me isn't waking up, and then I would wake up. So that's kind of the prologue to a lot of abduction stories, but I'm not claiming I was abducted by any means. It was just a recurring thing. And then years later, I find out, oh my gosh, that's, it sounds like some of these abduction stories, but no, I don't think I was, but it was one more thing to kind of increase my interest in the thing. But no, certainly not. I mean, I've been hearing some stories too from people that much more detailed, much more intriguing than anything I've ever seen.
Wow. Oh, well, I really am grateful for all of this. So I want to give you one last opportunity to, what do you hope men will understand, right? I know we've had a long conversation for men, and so I'm not trying to repeat any of that, but what do you hope men will take away from by where can they get this book also? And what do you hope they'll take away from? Because I also know when we were bringing up the topics of demons, Sam and I have talked about it a lot, how there can be a disordinate fascination, with that. And there can be, a curiosity that can keep us off track from what God's calling us to do in holiness. And so you, who's written, I think 60 books, right? Published books and hundreds of more articles and journals and things like that. I'd love for you to, what do you hope to leave men with, kind of parting thoughts? Yes.
Well, thanks. We've already mentioned one, humility. And a sense of wonder that it's easy for a man working hard in this world to, just to support his family and stuff, to kind of get closed in a little bit and not thinking beyond too much. But I like to define wonder as a sense of humility in the face of mystery. And the more so I'd say for men, you need to have courage. There could be things coming up in the next few years that will frighten a lot of people. Be not afraid. You don't have to be afraid. Our God is in control. He's all powerful. Anything that's out there, He's created, and He loves us dearly. So I'd say in this subject matter, be humble, be courageous, be brave about it, be open-minded, which is also a good trait for men and women as well, and let it grow your faith, because that's another thing. Not only does it grow our humility, but the more we realize the possibilities, the more we realize that this God that we serve is marvelous. He's wonderful. He's beyond what we can think. He can do more than anything we imagine, as St. Paul says. And let it increase our faith in Him, that whatever is out there that science discovers, He's in control. He created it all. He loves His creatures. He loves us. And just make it make it an occasion for growing in faith and humility.
No, thank you so very much. So where can men go to find your book? And we'll drop it in the show notes.
Yes, tanbooks.com online. So Tanbooks is the publisher. And they also have an interview with me there as well. We talked about maybe some different things from here. But I'm really grateful today that you give me this chance to talk about it. And appreciate all the ministry that you do through here and have done for a long time. And Sam and I have known each other, at least at a distance, for some years. And it's good work. Good work, man. Thank you for doing what you're doing. So much needed.
Yeah.
Fascinating conversation. And the book is wonderful. So I highly encourage everyone to check it out.
Yeah. So Paul, thank you so very much. We're just grateful for you joining us and giving us your time and wisdom here. We look forward to the next time where we can connect.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Sam. God bless you and all your viewers.
Amen. And as we like to end each of our episodes,
Be a man, be a saint.